Welcome back to another episode of Heart to Heart Conversations. And guys, I am so pumped for this one. Literally, there's no one I would rather have on to talk about self-care because when I think of Jess, self-care is her jam.
Yes, it is.
Love it. And it didn't always. It wasn't always your jam. And so there's so many ways that we could go with this, Jess, but first of all, thank you for being an amazing coach and human being. And there's a reason that we met. And so let's start there. Clearly, you're up to big things in this world, and you can't do that without self-care. So let's just jump off from there.
Okay. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think the bigger your mission, the bigger your purpose, the more that you give and serve, the more important this practice is. And I'm super excited and grateful to be here and to you, Marissa, for creating space for this simple topic that really is a guidepost and foundation for anyone who is in a servant position, which I would venture to say is everybody. We all serve someone in one capacity or another. So if you're listening, I would definitely encourage you to figure out what this would look like for you.
Yeah. And I think too, just about the context and the time that we're living in, why is self-care more important now than ever in terms of coronavirus and now the election coming up and just everything around us, the environment?
Well, yeah, let's just jump right in. The context right now is unprecedented. This is something that we have never seen before. And I think that self-care is the first thing to go, but it needs to be the first thing to stay. Because right now with coronavirus, racial tension and trauma, the upcoming election, when you think of it from a psychological perspective, self-actualization, a sense of belonging and contribution and love and connection, those things that self-care is usually associated with, like a luxury, is not applicable right now because our basic needs are being threatened at a psychological level. Some people are food insecure. Some people are afraid for their health and they're not leaving their home. Some people are quarantining and are experiencing severe isolation. Some people don't have access to not only their coping skills, but their basic needs, like their therapists, like their doctors, like their gyms. So I say all that because when our basic needs aren't being met, our body goes into fight or flight and it releases all these chemicals that are literally going to do damage to the body. And one of the proven remedies is holistic self-care practices. Simply getting back to the basics and figuring out what this practice looks like for you now, even though you might not have access to the gym, yoga studio, wine night with your girlfriend or your therapist. And so absolutely, given the context, self-care is more important now than ever.
And I'm going to touch on, so you said holistic self-care. And I love that you're bringing up, wine night with the girls and gym and stuff, because that is kind of where I think people naturally go to when they think of self-care. Yeah. And that's why it is like almost a luxury and not necessarily a priority. It's just kind of on top of everything. But what do you mean when you say holistic self-care and kind of back to the basics?
So self-care gets this interesting rap and rhetoric around it being a luxury, around it costing time and money and being something that you do after work, like hashtag bubble bath, hashtag, beach day, hashtag yoga practice, hashtag, wine night, which is all part of it. And when you really boil down what a self-care practice is, it is a holistic, preventative, healthy practice. So I like to view it as mental, emotional, energetic, spiritual, financial, relational, like hygiene. And the reason I say that is because ideally there are domains of self-care, right? Versus just this physical, personal practice, right? Where we're just taking care of our body. Self-care at a holistic level is taking care of our being on all domains, not just physical, but mental, physical, emotional, relational, financial, spiritual, vocational, right? Self-care is something that happens at work too. And when we can engage in holistic, well-rounded, proactive, unique, flexible practices in each of those domains and implement them consistently, just like you brush your teeth consistently, just like you vacuum your rug consistently, just like you change your sheets, just like you know, have an annual review at your job. We have natural checks and balances for other domains of our life. Why don't we do that for ourselves? And so when I say holistic, that's what I'm really talking about. I'm talking about this integrative, flexible practice that's taking care of our entire being in all the domains of our life, not just our bodies.
That is so good. And it's, yeah, I mean, we're human beings. And so it's about
Yes.
our being, not human bodies. We're not just bodies walking around. Right. And oh, that's so good. I think you asked a question there and it's like, yeah, I want to repeat that question of why don't we engage in these holistic self-care practices? What is it that stops people that you find most often?
I think it's a combination of things. I think there are two huge barriers, but before I get to those, let's just acknowledge that self-care is a skill. And unfortunately, it's not something that's taught and it's not something that's modeled. I think a lot of times stealing from Glenn and Doyle, as parents and servants and providers and teachers, etc., we take the martyr role, not the model role. And so we learn that self-neglect is equivalent to self-worth and that self-care, there is no time and space. And therefore I say that because I think the two biggest barriers, particularly for adults, is time and this guilt that they feel and or that is ascribed to them. So I think those are the two biggest barriers. There's obviously a lot, gender barriers, societal barriers, financial barriers, systematic barriers. And when you really boil it down, I think those are the two that I hear most often.
Yeah. And I think I just have to go to we as women, especially, take on that martyr role and nurturing everyone but ourselves. And yeah, just putting everything else before us. And what would you tell, say, a 20-something-year-old woman who came to you and said, you know, I'm just burnt out. I'm overwhelmed, tired, stressed. Like, I don't think I can go on. Like, what would be your first tip?
Listen. That would be my first tip, is to pause and listen, because what they're doing in that moment, at least the way that you presented it, is that this is what I'm experiencing. Tell me what to do. Let me do more. And I would actually encourage them to pause and listen to what they need. What's the first thing that comes up? And start there.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It makes me think that, you know I've done this in the past where you get so busy and overworked, and that's sometimes a way to avoid those hard feelings that might come up if you really do just pause, listen, and then and even potentially engage in self-care. It's kind of a cycle and a way to avoid yourself and the hard stuff.
Absolutely. It's really hard to deal with our thoughts and our emotions, particularly the ones that are uncomfortable or difficult, when we're too busy to do it, when we have too much pressure or too many things to do. I know for me, that's actually a trigger. I've learned it, and it took a therapist a few years calling me out on it, which is interesting because I'm also a licensed therapist. But for me, when my schedule gets too busy to do the things I love or to engage in things that I enjoy, I actually know that on some level there's something I'm avoiding. And so I'll intentionally start saying no and taking things off my schedule and creating space to listen. And 9 out of 10 times there's something there. But yeah, absolutely. It's really important to just pause and listen. And sometimes self-care doesn't even have to be this big elaborate thing. Quit my job, leave my husband, get a babysitter, hire a maid. Sometimes it could just be literally pausing, asking the question, what do I need right now? That's it. And sometimes it's taking a breath. Sometimes it's going home. Sometimes it's drinking a glass of water. Sometimes it's going on a walk. Sometimes it's cuddling with the pet. Sometimes it's turning the channel. It literally can be that simple if we gave ourselves the time and space to engage in the practice.
Yeah, and the permission to even ask the question, what do I need right now? Because to some people that might be seen as selfish, like, oh, I'm putting my needs first. Like it feels like this huge leap from maybe how they've been living their entire life.
I know for me, there was a reframe that happened. And I'm the type of person where I need tangible evidence. And so it took a while. There was a lag time. But I'll share this quick story with you. I felt the same way, and I would venture to say that a lot of people do. And it took about 6 months of me engaging in this practice every single day and documenting it for me to notice. So when I first started doing self-care consistently, it was back in 2015, 16. And I was full-time therapist. I was actually working as a therapist in 3 different agencies. I was really, really grinding. And one of the agencies had client satisfaction forms where clients would literally rank you. Were you engaged? Were you empathic? Did you feel held and supported? Were there errors? Were they on time? Did you guys make progress? All the things. Were they presentable? Were they kind? And my satisfaction ratings went through the roof, were some of the best in the entire agency after I started this practice. It didn't matter how talented I was. It didn't matter how much I knew. It didn't matter how many licenses or certifications or trainings I attended. When I literally started, just nothing else changed. Actually, it's crazy because a lot of things changed and they weren't necessarily good changes. So let's call it what it is. I was definitely in a transition. But the one thing that I can absolutely say for sure that was changing was my self-care practices. And those ratings went through the roof. And I thought, wow, Jessica, how selfish of you not to have done this sooner. You are a giver. It's what you do. And you're not walking the walk. And it's very clear that when you do, not only are you showing up better, but your work is better, your clients are better. It's irresponsible and selfish to not engage in this practice.
Wow. Let that sink in. Oh my gosh. Yep.
Do I still have moments of guilt? Yes. Do I still have moments of being quote unquote too busy? Yes. And I know the truth. And so I'm able to kind of get into a little bit of a conversation with it now.
Yeah, just kind of referring back, like, oh, so it helped in the past. Maybe I should do that again.
I have truer examples because my examples before were my mother. The examples before were what I heard on TV and watched in the movies and learned in graduate school. But that's not real. I mean, in theory, it's real, but it's not healthy, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, and that's interesting because, yeah, I look at you and I see how you essentially took your life and made it kind of a self-care experiment, right? A journey that were you doing a blog at the time?
Yeah, it literally was an experiment. I love that you put it that way because that's what it was. I had a theory. Basically, I designed an intervention and I had all these checks and balances to do. So, unfortunately, I did not listen when I was told that self-care is important as a mental health provider. I was optimistic and I was energetic and I had a lot of really great practices now that I look back for my physical body only. I did yoga, I worked out, I ate good, I drank water, I went to the beach, all physical, all of it, right? So I didn't listen. And as a result, I experienced what 70% of people in the field are now experiencing. I got burned out. And I say that because it doesn't have to be that way. Like that rhetoric is so outplayed. Like we know that self-care as a proactive preventative practice can mitigate the effects of stress. And yet we don't do it. So I didn't do it. I got burned out, go figure. And I dove into the research and I found self-care is the remedy. I thought I was going to find some really dynamic thing, but it really was just self-care. And I said, okay, listen, I'm going to do it. And I remember I went to a Starbucks on a Friday night after work, I went to the Barnes and Nobles across the street first to buy a journal. And then I went to Starbucks and I grabbed my favorite coffee and I sat down and I said, I'm not going to leave here until I figure out how I'm going to remedy this, because I was 2 years post-grad and I had just started as a therapist. I was still in my 20s. I was like, I can't quit now. I'm just at the beginning of my career. Like, how am I going to do this? And long story short, before I went home that night, I had designed the Happy Social Worker Project, which was a blog and a connected Snapchat where I was going to document every single day, because I was like, it's 10 seconds a day. You can't not do 10 seconds no matter how busy you are, right? I didn't even know what Snapchat was. I found it that night. And
I love it.
I documented it on my first day that night, and I committed to 365 days in a row of doing something self-care related. And it really was an experiment, because by day 7, I was out of things. I did the bubble bath. I did the yoga class. I took the lunch break. I think I took a sick day. I hung out with my girlfriends, and I was like SOL. I was like, oh my gosh, I have 360 more days and I have no idea what to do for self-care. I really did not know the depth of this practice. And it really was an experiment, because around day 100, I noticed the tipping point where a really particularly hard day at work, on my way home, instead of reverting to my go-to coping skills of grabbing a bottle of wine, a pint of ice cream, and watching Netflix, I actually went home and I went for a run. And I hate running, but I was actually listening to what my body needed and wanted, and I felt so much better afterwards. And it just continued from there. I left a toxic relationship. I left a toxic work environment. I moved out of a state I disliked. I reconnected with friends. I reconnected with myself. I started therapy. Like, it was a transformation from the inside out, and it literally just started with 10 seconds a day.
Wow. So powerful. And you even took it beyond 365 days, didn't you?
I did 650 because it was so freaking good for me. And at that point, I had a following, and people were doing their own self-care challenges. I had a couple people get to 100 days of self-care on their own too. So it was really beautiful, the community that we started. And as a result, I've published research on it. I've done keynotes. We have some journal articles coming out. So it's been a really messy, unexpected, but beautiful journey.
Yeah, and so inspiring, for those around you, and just obviously to see you and your transformation, but then for them to take it and make it their own as well.
Yes.
Right? And I think an aspect of that self-care too, just naturally, is self-love as well, would you say?
Absolutely. And allowing that self piece to be as unique and flexible as it needs to be. I think too, a lot of times there's this judgment or pressure of what this practice needs to look like, but all of us are different. Our lives are different. The context is different, and allow this practice to be as flexible and unique as you are.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Well, and you said you kind of ran out of things at day 7. So what did you do? Do you research? Do you ask other people?
I did all the things. I did research. I bought magazines, books, listened to podcasts, had conversations with other people about what do you do for self-care. I started journaling. What do I need? What brings me joy? What do I like doing? What energizes me? I started asking myself quality questions to get to figure out, what does my body and being on these different levels really need? And from there started coming up with self-care practices. And some days it was doing the overflowing laundry basket in the corner, because every time I looked at it, it was like a little bing of stress, right? Like, sometimes self-care was boring, and sometimes it was really elaborate, like leaving my 8-year relationship. So, again, it's really a unique, flexible, proactive practice that, when done consistently, can really mitigate the stressors, inevitable stressors of being human.
Yeah, just, oh my gosh. Yeah. Like, it goes back to what we said, like, we're all human beings, and it's normal to experience that those down days, the just questioning, like, what is it all for and why am I here? And I think part of the self-care and incorporating that, making it a practice, is obviously, increase self-love. I think self-worth too. When you talk about leaving the 8-year relationship, do you think you would have been able to do that without, the intentional self-care?
No.
It's crazy.
That's fact. Because I tried. for years, and I just couldn't. And then I remembered it was day 161.
Yeah.
I finally had the courage and worth and faith and trust in myself that I could figure it out.
Yeah.
Which sounds like a long time, but was really quick. That's like 6 months. Could you imagine building the courage and self-worth that you need to transform your life in 6 months with just a few minutes a day?
No, I can't. But I also know, I mean, you've talked about this before, where it's like, is it the compound effect, or, yeah, it's about how it's those little actions every day and the consistency that over time, it makes the biggest difference.
Absolutely. It's more about consistency and frequency than duration and intensity when it comes to habits. And I would say I struggle with the word ideally because there's a lot of judgment associated with that. And if you can be consistent in your self-care practices, that is where you're going to see the most benefit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even if you say forget a day or accidentally skip a day, as long as you engage in it, yep, the next day, what was that? Yeah, so you can't skip 2 days, right? Because then it kind of, the habit just goes to the wayside.
Yeah, 2 days is that's the danger zone, girl. Like never miss 2 days. If we're all human. If you miss a day, that's fine. And it's interesting. I did miss a day. It was probably like day 27. I missed a day, and I had tons of DMs, I guess, whatever the Snapchats are, where it's like, what did you do for self-care yesterday? And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, people are watching.
Oh, right.
And I never missed a day up until I ended for day 650.
And I think that's where the power comes in of you intentionally choosing to share it with the world, right? Because you could just say, oh, this is my little project, I'm going to do it for myself. But I mean, not only are they're holding you accountable, right? And obviously you're holding yourself accountable. So that's amazing that they reached out to you and you're like, hey, did you do it?
And you bring up a really important part that I don't think people are starting to recognize until now. And there's a lot of really beautiful conversation going on around sharing the responsibility of self-care. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations, agencies, partners, clients will pass the buck of self-care to the individual. Now, don't get me wrong, that is important. It is our responsibility as adults to take care of ourselves. We have needs. We don't want to divert all of our needs to other people. That's just not healthy, and it's not sustainable. And it's very hard to do self-care in isolation. If we can share that responsibility with our partners, with our friends, with our mentors, therapists, coaches, bosses, supervisors, colleagues, neighbors, etc., that accountability is there, that support is there, and we can kind of, as a collective, rise together in this practice. So sharing that responsibility, I understand the difficulty in it, trust me, and I can let you know the importance of it. It's immeasurable.
Yeah, and I think there's a level of vulnerability that goes along with the responsibility too, right? Like even just sharing that I'm doing this thing, I think for me sometimes, especially if there's a time period associated with it, it can bring up like, oh no, what if I forget a day? Or like, what if I mess up? And oh no, like they're all watching. And so it's kind of like I guess a double-edged sword in that way, where it's like, they are your team, they're there to support you, they're going to hold you accountable. And yeah, like you're not going to be able to get out of this one.
Yeah, and that's the power of accountability.
Yep.
Choose wisely. I will say that. Choose wisely. Don't choose your critical friend. Don't choose your partner who's going to use this as another excuse to criticize you. And if that's the case, then probably leave the relationship. But I digress, right? Yeah, choose wisely. Choose someone who's going to hold you accountable with love. Be supportive. Ask questions versus pass judgments. It could really be a game changer personally and professionally when you can share that responsibility with someone who's going to support you.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and I look at you and I'm like, you have self-care down, right? Like, I mean, you even alluded to earlier, like, yeah, it's not like we ever really master it, right? But I am curious, like, what, if you're open to sharing this, what is your self-care practice like these days?
Yeah, so my self-care practice looks very different now than it did in February. In February, my self-care practices were extremely elaborate, because I had been doing something consistently for years and I had really honed in on what was working for me. And then coronavirus hit, and then Black Lives Matter hit, and the election came around. And I can tell you my go-to coping skills, self-care skills, stress management skills right now are monitoring my input of information, where I consume information, from who, how much of it. That's been a big one. I am cleaning up my sleep hygiene and getting back to the basics, really trying to make sure I get 8 hours of sleep, cutting back on caffeine, drinking more water, eating 3 meals a day, moving daily, getting outside daily, taking a shower every day. Like it is basic right now. And when I have the energy, I will engage in some of those other practices that I'm starting to get access to again now. There's yoga once a week down at the park. The gyms are open with a mask. Some of my friends are becoming a little bit more lenient, and we're having like get-togethers outdoors, socially distanced walks, things like that. So I'm starting to kind of engage a little bit more in some of my go-to self-care practices. Like I did a travel trip, but it was just it was a really long drive because it was just me and my dog. Like I wasn't putting anyone in danger, and we drove down to North Carolina and drove the Blue Ridge Parkway. So travel is a really big self-care bucket for me, and I usually go to these super elaborate places and stay there for weeks and months on end, but that's just not available to me right now. And so I've had to get really creative in what that looks like. So again, my self-care practices right now are getting back to the basics, making sure that I am taking care of my basic needs and creating space for my mind and my body and my emotions to show up vulnerably and share whatever's on my heart and mind, and making sure that I'm just doing what I need to function, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And as much as, yeah, I love travel, I'm right there with you too. And it was hard for a while of like, gosh, I mean, I didn't realize how wrapped up my identity was in travel and how much I felt, yeah, like I felt like it was just my aliveness, my energy, everything that was keeping me going was all of a sudden sucked out from underneath me. Um, but I've gone through this process now, maybe similar to you, where it's like, okay, Marissa, you can experience aliveness while you travel, and you can also experience that alive feeling by doing breath work every morning at home, or by being outside in nature. And it's the basics. It's going back to, okay, like I have me, my breath, I have maybe my journal, and tapping into that.
That was me in March. My self-care in March was literally just every single day saying the mantra, I am safe today. I was so scared because I was sitting at home watching the news like everyone else, scrolling through Facebook, filling my days. Everything that I knew was pulled from under me. My everything that was in my schedule got deleted basically, and I was just sitting there in it. I was quarantined alone, and it was in my apartment, and I was just like, and I live in the middle of the city, and it was silent. And I was like, oh my goodness, what is happening? And so my mantra was, I am safe today. I am grateful for my health. I'm going to eat. I'm going to move. I'm going to FaceTime my friends and family. And I am going to go to sleep. Like I just was like, how basic can I get? Because it got to that point, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that at that point, it was more important to engage in the self-care practices than when things, quote unquote, returned to normal.
Right. Oh, I mean, this is when self-care practices really, the rubber hits the road, or however that saying goes, because
Yeah.
like you can be doing it. Yeah. Oh, you can be great at your self-care when things are all good and life is looking bright. But then, yeah, what happens when it feels like the world is ending? What do you do then?
And here's the power of the consistency too. I didn't skip a beat. I had a day where I kind of vegged out in Netflix, but I needed it that day. But I didn't miss a beat because I was already engaged in a consistent practice. So I knew without judgment, I needed to continue. It's just going to look different. Yep. Versus people who only engage in this practice when they need it. And then they're like, oh, this doesn't work. And it's like, it doesn't work or you didn't work it.
Good
right.
Point.
It's kind of like, I mean, I know this analogy is so overused, but it's because it's good. If I told you to go to the gym and bench 200 pounds right now, probably couldn't do it. But if you really made a goal and came up with things that felt aligned for you and hired a trainer and cleaned up your diet and were going consistently and doing rep schemes that were building strength and supporting muscles, and yes, you probably could bench more than you could right now.
Yeah. With time and with that commitment, and even maybe a financial investment. I know we've been talking about going back to the basics, but sometimes it does take, if you have the resources and the time and all of that, to financially invest in a coach, a therapist, a personal trainer, someone who is literally paid to help you reach your goals and to take care of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an investment, whether that be time, money, or energy. I would venture to say one of the best investments you'll ever make, though.
Oh, yeah.
Because when you show up better, when your needs are taken care of, when you are clear, strong, and present, whatever you were trying to do is going to be better. Yep. In every area of your life.
Yeah, I was going to say, I bet you too, it'll trickle into all aspects. I mean, we talked about earlier, emotional, financial, vocational, just all of the aspects of what makes you the human being that you are.
Absolutely.
Right. So I think, yeah, that initial investment, it'll hopefully 10x once you make it and you, really make that commitment and hold true to it. Yeah, I think was it you? I think you've said it before of how you and your energy are the greatest asset. Yep.
I wouldn't quote myself saying that. I'm probably, and that's what's interesting. Everything I'm saying is information that I've consumed and experienced, and I'm regurgitating my version of it. I do believe in originality and creativity, and like, I can't take credit for any of this really. But that is something that I said, particularly in the space that we were in together this summer. Your energy is your greatest asset. The person with the most energy is the person with the most influence and the most power. And that can be associated with whatever you're trying to cultivate more of, whether that be income, leads, support, love, friendships, health. The person with the most energy.
Yeah, and everything comes down to energy. I mean, money and like it really it's all connected. It's all
of it. I love this moment. I call it fireworks. It's like when the things just like when you light it and it goes pop, 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 right? It's like when you recognize the interconnectedness of all of it.
Yes.
It's like we're talking about this one concept, 8 letters, self-care. But in this moment, we're recognizing the residual impact and how big it really is.
Oh, love it. And I'm just so grateful too, because obviously we're having this conversation now, but just think about too the listeners who they're going to hear this too, and they're going to have their firework moment or whatever it might be.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully they can continue to have it by taking what we talked about and applying it, because I know that we know this. Here's the other thing about self-care that I think is a barrier that's unspoken. We all know this. I have not said anything that has probably blown your mind tonight or that you've never heard. My question to you is, are you doing it? And are you doing it consistently? And are you doing it on multiple domains in a holistic way? And if not, do that. Do that. Create a plan, share that responsibility, have some form of accountability, be open and flexible to if and when it shifts. to meet you in that moment. And then you can kind of allow it to be that, oh, that's my self-care practice.
Yeah. I think what I'm hearing you say is really do what you know.
Yeah. It's one thing to know it, but are you doing it? Like, that is the disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
That is the massive disconnect. And that's the difference between individuals who are here. And I know that people listening might not be able to see, but that's the difference between people who are thinking about it and doing it. People who are experiencing the struggle after the struggle after the struggle versus people who finally have their breakthrough moment. You know, my very first life coach, it was amazing. I saw him a decade after we worked together at a live event. It was just amazing to see the transformation of his life. And he said, what you're seeing now is not an overnight success.
Yeah.
Right? To you, it seems like I was an overnight success, but how many of you worked with me back in 2009? Right? And you see all the hands raised and things like that, right? So again, same thing with anything, really, not just self-care. I know you know this stuff, but are you doing it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the game changer there. Yep. Oh, so good. I want to make sure too, we leave space at the end here. Is there anything maybe I didn't ask or something that is top of mind for you that you want to make sure to share on this heart-to-heart conversation?
There are so many things like we were talking about before. I was like, ring me in because I'm going to go, Marissa. This is something that I can talk about forever. The most important thing I would say is self-care is not selfish, just in case you needed to hear that. The more you engage in self-care, the more you can give, the more you can be, the more you can do. And that is, I would venture to say, most people's intention and goal anyway. So allow this simple but powerful practice to be a part of your daily life. If you can take 3 minutes out a day to brush your teeth, you can take 3 minutes out a day to address other needs. And I promise you, quicker than you could imagine, with a consistent practice, you can experience transformation from the inside out.
Yes. Full body, yes. I totally agree with all of that you were saying. I just want to drop the mic, even though I don't have a mic. There we go, metaphorical mic. Where can people find you, Jess, if they want to connect, if they want to, can they see your documented self-care stuff online?
That's a great question. Things have evolved since then, but if you go back in the Google search far enough, you'll find some goodies. But the way that you can connect with me is just my name. It's jessicademarchis.com. That's my website. But I'm on social. Send me a DM, friend request me. It's JM DeMarchis on Instagram, Jessica Marie on Facebook. And like I said, you can also Google me and poke around and find some pretty interesting stuff too.
You're an open book.
I am. All the goodness for anyone who's wanting to find it.
I love it. And we will include that in the show notes. And heck, I mean, we would love to see you and your self-care journey, tag us, tag this episode once it's out. We would just love to support you on your self-care journey and see what you are up to.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So grateful for this space, this topic, and in any way I can continue to serve you, Marissa, or your people, let me know, whether that be self-care or any and all the things.
Yes. We are here to support you. We are here to support each other, and it's all connected.